Tonight on Primetime Politics, saying no.
Monsieur Blanchet.
The Trudeau Liberals reject a Bloc Québécois motion hoping to extend old age security. So will the BQ now join Conservatives and actively work to bring the government down? We will speak to the party's deputy leader. Also, losing ground to the NDP, a new poll from Abacus Data has New Democrats now leading Liberals across many parts of the country. Pollster David Colleto will be by to share his insights. And
Iran's action was in full accordance with the inherent right to self-defense.
Those who attack us will face serious consequences.
As the UN Security Council holds an emergency meeting, we will speak to a defense expert about the options for de-escalating violence in the Middle East and preventing a greater war between Israel and Iran. This is Primetime Politics. Hello, everyone. I'm Michael Serapio. A motion to extend a top-up to old age security will not see the light of day. Introduced by the Bloc Québécois in a private member's bill, it did gain the support of Conservatives, New Democrats, even a handful of Liberals. But because it is a money bill committing the government to spending billions of dollars, it needed the support of Trudeau and his cabinet, otherwise known as a royal recommendation. They did not give it, and here is the explanation we heard today from the government House Leader Karina Gould.
It is not appropriate for an opposition day motion to set the precedent of getting a royal recommendation this way. I also want to be clear that, as I have stated many times in the media, I am in discussion with all parties at all times to try and make this Parliament work, and that will be what I continue to do moving forward.
Now, passage of this bill was one condition set out by the Bloc Québécois, and in exchange, the party said it would not vote the government out before the Christmas break. So, what happens now? To talk about this, we're joined by Christine Normandin. She is the Bloc Québécois Deputy House Leader. Madame Normandin, thank you for joining us.
It's a pleasure, Michael. Thanks for having me.
Listen, you know, when we were talking last week, the government seemed open to this motion of extending the old age security top-up. Again, open, no commitments at the time. But now we have the Prime Minister, his cabinet, many Liberals voting against it today. Does that decision surprise you in any way?
Not necessarily, and I don't think we can conclude that the bill has no chance to pass from now on. It does send a rather bad message. Does it make the window of opportunity be closing a bit more? Indeed. Is it completely closed? No. And that's why we won't commit to toppling the government right now. The way we did mention that if we felt that at some point it would become impossible for the bill to pass, we would start having discussions with other parties. It makes it maybe a bit more difficult today, but it's not completely impossible. What the government has mentioned about voting against the bill was not because they don't want to extend the royal recommendation to the bill. It's because of a procedural thing. They don't want to vote, to have the government voting to have the government implement, give the royal recommendation. So they didn't say no, they didn't say yes neither, but we don't see the window as completely closed, so we're ready to give a bit more time, because what we were aiming for from the beginning was to make gains for seniors. We still have a chance. It's growing thinner, but there's still a chance that we might achieve it, since they haven't said no period. We won't allow it. But the time seems to be running against the Liberals at the moment. But there's still a chance that we can get it, and we'll give it a try.
So a chance, as you say, and part of that is because we heard it from Karina Gould going into this, that they didn't want to set this precedent where essentially a money bill is being started by a private member's motion rather than coming from the government. Does that mean then that there are talks happening behind closed doors between the Bloc and the Liberals on this?
Well, there's discussions between our House Leader, Alain Terrien, and the Leader of the government, Karina Gould. So there's discussions, maybe not necessarily negotiations, but they explained to each other their position on the topic. So there's still plenty of room to have have discussion. We haven't closed the door. If the phone rings, we'll answer. So there's still room for that because we're acting in good faith and hoping to make gains on both our bills. So we have to answer the phone. We're not playing partisan games and just trying to topple the government for the sake of it. We're trying to get something. So as long as they're willing to discuss, we are willing to listen.
Are you at all discouraged then when you hear Adam Van Koeverden, who is a parliamentary secretary, saying that he believes the Bloc Québécois' heart is in the right place, but he doesn't think this top-up is necessary because it actually won't be addressing seniors' poverty as your party wants to do? Does that type of statement discourage you?
Well, not necessarily, because when you think about it, the bill as passed second reading and as passed unanimously in committee, so there's a will from all members in the House to have it go forward, and that's one of the reasons we decided to go on with that specific bill. It already had approval from the House instead of, that's why we are so fierce on having that bill passed and not any other possibility that the government could come with that could let either the Liberals or the NDP or the Conservatives try to make amendments with. And the bill is already passed. It cannot be changed. So, and it fixes discrimination that has been created by the Liberals. So in that sense, we think it is the best option to go further with, and since it got assent from a majority in the House already, we felt that we were acting in good faith in asking for that bill to be passed. So notwithstanding other comments that you may hear on the grounds of the bill, it still got support.
So you want this bill, as you say, it already has support. You want it to go forward as is. You still have this October 29th deadline, and what I'm hearing from you is you and your leader, your party has not given up hope on this actually passing. So that said, if these discussions are happening between the House leaders, I wonder what your discussions are behind closed doors with Conservatives, because they are very anxious to bring this government down. Are those discussions happening at the same time?
Well, there's no reason at the moment to have those discussions, as anyways they voted with us on the bill, which they did on the second reading also before we came with our ultimatum. Right now it's more with the government that we have to discuss, since it's in their power to grant the royal recommendation that could make the bill go further and eventually be adopted by both houses. So our priority is so far with the Liberals. They have a say in what's to come in the next few days, because yes, we have our ultimatum of the October 29th, but if we see before that there's absolutely no chance that the bills will pass, we could start going a bit faster with discussions than with other parties, including Conservatives and the NDP. So let's say if in a few days, weeks from now, nothing has moved, no royal recommendation has been granted, we'll know that it's impossible that the bills pass third reading in the House and then Senate. Then we might start the discussions with opposition parties a bit earlier than the 29th.
Christine Normandin, I always appreciate the time. Thank you for this again.
It's a pleasure.
Well, time now for a look at what else happened in politics today.
This deadly cycle of tit-for-tat violence must stop. Time is running out.
That was the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres as he addressed an emergency session of the UN Security Council. The meeting called for today after Iran's missile attacks on Israel and Israel's offensive against Hezbollah in Lebanon. But the early part of the meeting was overshadowed when Israel declared Guterres persona non grata, accusing him of failing to condemn Iran's attack unequivocally. Guterres denied this, leading him to repeat an earlier statement of condemnation. The Prime Minister addressed the situation in the Middle East today, speaking with media before the start of his weekly caucus meeting.
We unreservedly condemn Iran's ballistic missile attack against Israel. It is further destabilizing action by this terrorist regime in the region, putting civilians at risk and running the risk of a wider war.
Trudeau went on to say Israel has a right to defend itself against attacks, while stressing the importance of preventing a wider war and enacting a ceasefire in both Lebanon and Gaza. Meanwhile, the Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre released a statement also condemning Iran for its attack on Israel. Poilievre, writing on X, "Conservatives support Israel's right to defend itself and defeat the terrorists." And the NDP leader expressed concerns about Israelis facing the threat of bombs from Hezbollah and Iran, but also called on Canada to implement a two-way arms embargo with Israel. Well, with his thoughts on the matter, we're now joined by Walter Dorn. He is a professor of defense studies. He teaches at the Royal Military College and the Canadian Forces College. Walter, always good to see you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Michael. Good to be with you.
Listen, I want to begin with what we've been hearing from Israel since this missile attack. They say that they cannot let Iran's attack go unanswered, but the Biden administration continues to caution Israel from attacking Iran's nuclear facilities directly. Can you walk us through what kind of impact that would actually have on the current situation?
Well, a strike at the Nuntaz nuclear facility in Iran would be really unprecedented for attacks within Iran. There have been cyber attacks on that facility, and some of its scientists have been assassinated. But a direct attack on a nuclear facility could cause all kinds of repercussions, including some radioactive fallout. So this would have to be very carefully planned, and also it would signal a major escalation, and it would probably give Iran the right, or at least in its own mind, the right to be able to attack Israeli nuclear facilities, which of course could be very damaging should they succeed. So this is all an area of very dangerous escalation.
A dangerous escalation, as you say. So short of that, then, what are Israel's other options? Since, already it's fighting Iran's other regional proxies, Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis. What can Israel actually do to answer back to this missile launches that we saw yesterday?
Iran could find itself subject to attacks on its sites for nuclear or for conventional weapons. It could be most likely strikes against the surface-to-air missiles, so that would then make it more vulnerable to Israeli fighter strike attacks, that is from jets. It's also possible that Israel could use a variety of subterfuge. It's already shown a huge capacity for doing unconventional forms of attacks. For instance, the explosives that are put into walkie-talkies and pagers of Hezbollah, that showed that the Mossad was very busy doing more subtle forms of attack, and we don't know what's inside Iran. In the past, the Israelis have put up machine guns, which are automatically controlled remotely, so that they don't have personnel at danger, and they were assassinating Iranian scientists and others remotely. So there's all kinds of new forms of attack that Israel has been inventing, and we may very well see some of those come up in the near future.
And again, Israel says that it cannot let what Iran did yesterday go unanswered. In the meantime, though, we have the G7, which of course includes Canada, and the group says diplomacy is still possible. Given that both Netanyahu and the leadership of Iran have ignored pleas and warnings from the U.S. respectively, is diplomacy really still possible?
Well, Benjamin Netanyahu has shown a disdain for diplomacy. Right now, he's on a path of military solutions only. And we know that in the long term, that's not going to work. You're going to create generations of Arabs who have a deep-seated hatred for these acts that are being done now. We also know that there's going to be, over time, an escalation from those who were attacked and those whose family members were attacked. I don't think that the fiery speeches that Netanyahu are showing any kind of olive branch to any of the Arab countries, and so I think that we're going to have more escalation, and unfortunately that's going to mean more deaths. So I think that the current trajectory doesn't allow for a peaceful solution, at least in the near term.
Do you think Iran wants or is capable of engaging in a larger scale war against Israel and by extension, if this continues, with the United States?
Yes, Iran has this large landmass, a huge arsenal. It's providing a lot of weapons to Russia now. Some of those might be diverted and used in attacks on both Israel and potentially American bases and American facilities in Iraq. Iran has a huge amount of influence in Iraq, and that's also an area of extreme importance for the United States because of its presence and its past history inside Iraq. So I think you can see a lot of levers that Iran can pull, including those forces, the Houthis, Hezbollah forces, even the Syrian government. It is also a client state of Iran's. And so we could see a variety of responses and probably some mixture, and not entirely under Iranian control too. There's a lot of people wanting to seek vengeance at this point.
Well, you know, as you talk about all that, Walter, we continue to hear from Israel this argument that this war, now being fought on many fronts, is an existential war for the country. What does Israel mean by that?
Existential means that the very security of the state, the existence of the state is at threat. Usually those terms are used when you're talking about nuclear weapons and the destructive power of nuclear weapons. But Israel feels itself surrounded, and that it has many enemies, and that their attacks on Israel are threatening its very existence. I mean, I think the word existential is overblown. None of the Arab countries have nuclear weapons, but it's a question of self-perception. And if Israel feels itself that its very existence is at threat, then it will take even more drastic measures and feel justified in doing so, which is another form of escalation. It's a rhetorical escalation that could result in very concrete destruction on the ground.
So temperatures running very high here on many sides. What can then a group like the United Nations do? Because of course we saw the UN Security Council hold this emergency session today. So what role can the UN play in this to try to de-escalate and untangle the situation?
Well, the UN should be the voice of sanity, of de-escalation, to put some pressure, although it's not seen to be working, but put pressure on Israel and on Iran and the other parties in the Middle East. There actually are peacekeeping forces in both Lebanon and Syria, in the Golan Heights of Syria and in Lebanon. And those forces are the eyes and ears of the international community to look at the violations that are going on and provide objective information. At the same time, those forces in UNIFIL, the UN Interim Force in Lebanon, they will be really concerned about their own safety and security. So they'll be staying pretty close to base and not doing long-range patrols where they could be vulnerable to both Israeli and Hezbollah attack inadvertently. So the UN is still the most important multilateral forum for engagement, and it has boots on the ground in the area, but both sides are really trying to push it aside so they can attack each other. And the man in the middle is going to be suffering when those two sides are going after each other.
And that is certainly what we've been seeing, civilians getting hurt and dying in all of this. Walter, I always appreciate the time and the insight. Thank you.
Thank you. Good to be with you, Michael. And we'll pray and hope for the best outcome of this terrible conflict and this widening crisis.
Thank you, Walter. Well, the U.S. vice presidential debate proved to be very different than the presidential debate last month. Different in that it was substantive and far more cordial.
Tim, first of all, I didn't know that your 17-year-old witnessed a shooting. I'm sorry about that, and I hope that you're doing okay. Christ have mercy. It is awful.
Well, I've enjoyed tonight's debate, and I think there was a lot of commonality here, and I'm sympathetic to misspeaking on things, and I think I might have with the senator.
Me too, man. And I think that Governor Walz and I actually probably agree that we need to do better on this. The question is just how do we actually do it?
Still, there were clear differences between policies and assessments of the challenges the United States faces, and arguably it was a first chance for many Americans to hear and assess both the Minnesota Governor Tim Walz and Ohio Senator J.D. Vance. Now, earlier today, I spoke to Larry Jacobs about the debate. He is the founder and director of the Center for the Study of Politics and Governance at the University of Minnesota. Take a listen to what he said about how consequential last night's contest was.
Vice presidential debates rarely matter. It's the undercard for the main battle, which is between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. On the other hand, if you look back at 2020, it was decided by 21,000 votes in 3 states out of 155 million ballots cast. And we're likely to see something pretty close again. And so not having much of an impact could still be decisive. I think the key dynamic last night was that J.D. Vance kept going back to the issues of the economy and immigration. And we know that Americans consider those the top 2 issues, that they give Donald Trump the advantage on them. They see him as more likely to be a change agent, whereas Kamala Harris is seen as someone more likely to continue with the same approach. That's just not good news for the Harris-Walz ticket. And I think last night, J.D. Vance was able to carry through the brief in emphasizing those issues. And for voters who are maybe up for grabs, who heard that, I think they're going to be thinking, I'm not sure about Donald Trump. He could be a monster, but maybe America needs a monster at this moment.
Larry Jacobs from the University of Minnesota. Now, the two of us had more to talk about, and you can find the full interview on our website and on the CPAC YouTube channel. Well, a new poll from Abacus Data has more bad news for the Trudeau Liberals. Take a look at the numbers. Nationally, Conservatives are still enjoying a double-digit lead over all other parties, claiming 43% of the committed vote share right now. Liberals come in at a distant second, down 1 percentage point, and then followed by the NDP, up 1 percentage point themselves. But take a look at what happens when you take Quebec out of the equation. Conservatives still have a commanding lead, but New Democrats come in second place, leading the Liberals by 3 points at 22%. Well, with more on the Abacus Data poll, we're now joined by the company's founder and CEO, David Colleto. David, thank you for making the time.
Good to see you, Michael.
Okay, so let's begin here with the NDP because, you know, from a layman's perspective, this seems to be fairly huge. The party is now leading the Liberals countrywide when you factor out Quebec numbers. How devastating is that for the Trudeau Liberals?
Well, it's devastating in 2 ways, I think. One, in the sense that, well, now they're trailing the NDP, a party that, you know, is 4th place in the House of Commons and is, from all the other research we've done, you know, they share the biggest pool of voters who are open to voting for either of them. So they're their direct competitor in trying to attract that progressive voter. But it's devastating, I think, for a psychological reason, in that there are lots of Canadians who don't want Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives to win the next election, probably a majority of the country. And so the fight over the next few months is trying to figure out who's the alternative for that. And if the New Democrats are seen increasingly by people to be that alternative, because the polls are signaling that, then you might see, you know, not a flood of people, but more of those Liberal voters right now moving to the NDP in belief that they will be best able to stop Pierre Poilievre.
Okay, well, we'll talk about the Conservative numbers in a bit, but when you look at this, again, NDP result, when you take Quebec out, is this, do you think, a judgment on Trudeau's leadership or the party as a whole? And I ask that because I wonder if changing the Liberal leader would improve the party fortunes in any way.
Well, I think so much of just the decline in Liberal numbers is almost directly attributed to how people feel about the Prime Minister, right? As pollsters like me say, the correlation between how you view the Prime Minister and your likelihood to vote Liberal is almost perfect. If you don't like them, you're not voting Liberal, and if you like them, and there's not many left who do, most of them are going to vote Liberal. So I think in politics today, it's very hard for us to separate how we feel about the person who is the most prominent, is the leader of a party, and how we feel about that party. And so I think the NDP's gain is probably less to do with the New Democrats themselves, and probably some indication that ending the confidence and supply arrangement has allowed them maybe some space to be seen as a change agent, and the continued deterioration in the Prime Minister's personal numbers.
Okay, but when you look at the NDP number, while a lead, again, when you take Quebec out, it's not a breakaway number from the Liberals. So would that translate into more seats for the NDP or just guarantee a vote split?
Well, the bad news in this number for the New Democrats is, I don't think it generates many new seats. They're still third in Ontario. They're second in Saskatchewan and Alberta, but they're so far behind the Conservatives in both of those provinces that it's unlikely to convert into any seats. And there's probably some good news in British Columbia, but again, it's hard for us to say, is that in part because there's a provincial election going on there, or is this really solid federal NDP support? I think this is if you're the New Democrats, you're probably saying this is the first step. It's probably not hopefully the last step if you're them, but it doesn't mean they're going to win, dozens more seats. It just means, again, psychologically, maybe that's going to help consolidate some of that vote in places where the NDP is stronger than the Liberals, and the Prairies and BC right now are clearly two regions where that's the case.
Okay. Well, let's talk about the Conservative lead right now. It's been in double digits for well over a year now. How hard set is that support, would you say?
Well, I think there's two ways of looking at that. I mean, when we ask voters who support the Conservatives today whether they're likely to change their mind, 6%, so a very small sliver of that 43 that they have right now, say they would likely change their mind. So that is not a lot of voters. And if they all moved over to another party, the Conservatives would still have, over 40% of the vote. But another way to look at it is when we asked them in another survey we did, is your vote for the Conservatives more about liking Mr. Poilievre, liking the Conservative Party, liking their policies, or is this more about not liking the Liberals, in particular Mr. Trudeau? And 4 out of 10 of those Conservatives say it's more about not liking the Liberals and Mr. Trudeau. And so that tells me that it's firm as long as those conditions remain. As long as the Prime Minister is the leader of the Liberal Party, as long as he is the head of the top of that ballot, I think it's going to be hard for any party to start chipping away at that Conservative lead. And so I think it's increasingly over time now. It's been a year since the Conservatives opened this kind of lead. It is firming up. And unless something fundamentally changes in the political landscape, those are voters who are looking for change, and they see the Conservatives as the best vehicle to achieve that.
Okay, and to that, there is one more number I want to discuss with you, because it was interesting to see that public support for an election right now, it's not a majority of Canadians that want it, but it is the leading number. I think about 32% is what I saw in your poll. How widespread is that sentiment, geographically, demographically, or is that support for an election happening now coming mainly from voters who identify as Conservative?
So it's mostly Conservatives, but it's also people who generally want a change in government. So if you're somebody out there watching this show who's like, I'll do anything to change this government, well, then to me, it's not surprising that they would be open to an election. And the flip side is true. About the third of Canadians who say, no, I don't want an election now, I'll wait till next October. Well, most of them aren't as anxious for change as the third that want that election as soon as possible. The rest of the country, about half say, well, maybe an earlier election will work, but maybe not before Christmas or the New Year. And then there's 1 out of 5 who say, I really don't care. So I think the language about saying Canadians don't want an election isn't true. I think there are many who do. And those are the folks who look at the current government and say, I want to change who's in charge. And if I have the chance to do it sooner rather than later, I'm going to relish in that opportunity.
Okay, very interesting results here, David. Thank you for joining us to talk about them.
Thanks, Michael.
That's David Colleto from Abacus Data. And that is our program for this Wednesday. I'm Michael Serapio. For everyone here at CPAC, thank you for watching. Primetime Politics is back tomorrow. Until then, take care.